Hi everyone, Scott from Tilly the Lad here. Today I wanted to provide my fan review of Gunstar Heroes for the SEGA Genesis / Mega Drive. This game's reputation precedes it. It is widely considered to be a top 10, possibly even top 5 Genesis game. It released on Sega's 16-bit home console in September 1993 and has been ported to numerous other systems since then, including the Game Gear in 1995 and the Nintendo 3DS in 2015. It is of course included in many of the numerous Genesis / Mega Drive collections. I played this title for this review via my Genesis Mini. This is a mini plug-and-play retro console that Sega themselves created and launched in late 2019. The company had dabbled in systems like this before, but they always licensed out the manufacturing and emulation to third parties. It's cool playing these kinds of games on actual Sega hardware as opposed to a compilation disc or PC. Additionally, the Genesis Mini has some modern conveniences, chiefly the ability to output to modern displays through HDMI at 720p. With all that said, I hope you go on to enjoy the rest of this video. Gunstar Heroes' history started at Konami in the early 90s. At that time, a few developers within the company pitched an idea for an action shooting video game. They were promptly rejected by the higher-ups at Konami, who believed such a game would never sell. This irked the developers, who had grown fatigued with what they felt was the games industry's over-reliance on iterative releases in already established franchises. That might sound familiar. Shortly thereafter, these rebellious developers left their jobs at Konami and founded a new studio called Treasure so they could have the freedom to work on their original game. Treasure would go on to be known for their wacky, unique, and quality software throughout the 90s and 2000s. Their gamography includes Dynamite Headdy on the Genesis, Guardian Heroes on the Saturn, Bangai-O on the N64 and Dreamcast, Ikaruga on the Dreamcast and GameCube, and Wario Worlds on the GameCube. I'm sure I'm missing some of their other work, it's pretty extensive. But I digress. There were basically two platforms that Treasure could release their game on in the early 90s, the Super Nintendo and the Genesis. Ultimately, the team went with the latter. Among other reasons, they believed the Genesis to be more powerful and easier to develop for when compared to Nintendo's offering. Treasure pitched their idea to Sega, who were initially hesitant to greenlight the project since Treasure had yet to develop a single video game. But Sega eventually agreed to publish the title after a few months of deliberation. Gunstar Heroes' plot centers on Colonel Red, a dictator bent on world domination. His plan is to procure 4 powerful and mystical gems and use them to awaken an immensely powerful mechanical being called Gold and Silver. The main protagonists are Red and Blue, who are twins of the ruling Gunstar family. It is up to them to foil Colonel Red's nefarious plot. Things also get personal for them as the vile dictator kidnapped their older brother Green and used mind control on Green to learn of the gems' locations and turn him into a mindless yet formidable servant. The visual presentation of Gunstar Heroes is fine or serviceable. The visuals no doubt get the job done, and each level is thematically distinct, but nothing in particular stood out to me aside from some pseudo 3D assets and some of the bosses and backgrounds. It's entirely possible that the game looks miles better on a CRT TV. Though certain character designs are really well done, I especially liked Yellow and the fixed shot iteration of Red/Blue with their hair flowing over their headband. The moment-to-moment gameplay featured in Gunstar Heroes is solid and varied. First and foremost, as you can probably tell from the footage you're seeing, it is fast-paced, frantic, and chaotic. The game's soundtrack wonderfully and excellently amplifies this sense of frenetic energy. It is triumphant, energetic, fast-paced, and intense. At the start of the game, you can choose between a fixed shooting or run-and-gun style. The former makes it so that you can aim in all 8 directions when stationary. The downside is you can't move and shoot at the same time unless you jump first. The run and gun style, as the name implies, allows you to fire your weapon and run at the same time, but the trade-off is that you have to be moving in order to shoot above or below you. I'd imagine most folks would recommend the run and gun style. This game is very chaotic, and this option accentuates that in perhaps the best possible way. You might find yourself in a weirdly zen state as you bob and weave through enemy fire while responding in kind with your own. It's a lot of fun. It is for this very reason that I also recommend this playstyle to newcomers. However, with all that said, I always opt for the fixed shooting option. I generally play video games in a more cautious and defensive manner, so I feel like this choice suits me better. It allows me to get in a good and relatively safe position and pick my shots. I find that the run and gun style puts me in more compromised spots. The big innovation that Gunstar Heroes adds to the classic 2D action shooter formula is its weapon system. There are 4 ammo types. Force, which is a standard circular and arcadey bullet-like projectile. Lightning, which is a narrow beam. Fire, which emits flames from the weapon. And Chaser, which automatically tracks hostiles. All of these ammo types have their strengths and weaknesses. Force is a pretty standard projectile, but it has a good spread. Lightning can negate a hostile's own electric weapon and can also go through multiple enemies, but it's a very narrow projectile that fires in a straight line. Chaser makes it so that you don't have to aim basically at all, but it doesn't always target the desired enemy. It can have a mind of its own. Finally, Fire is super effective at close range, but is virtually useless at further distances. You can combine 2 ammo types for your weapon. For example, Force plus Fire yields the Exploding Fireball. This gives you the high damage of Fire plus the range and spread of Force. In all, there are 10 unique combinations. This gives the core combat tons of variety since there are a plethora of weapon types with which to experiment. It's immensely satisfying to find combos that work particularly well for certain bosses and/or stages. But this does lead into one of my only real critiques of the game. That is, I felt the balancing of the weapon types needed a bit more fine-tuning. Specifically, the Lightning plus Chaser combo was overpowered, especially when paired with my careful playstyle. Chaser made it so that I didn't have to worry at all about aiming. I could just focus on getting into a favorable position. Lightning's addition allowed the auto-locking projectiles from my weapon to go through stage hazards and other enemies. It was a little frustrating when my gun would lock onto hostiles that I didn't want to target, but that is a small trade-off that I was more than willing to accept. I rode this combination through my entire playthrough. I'd be interested to hear if any of you viewers agree or disagree with this. Please feel free to let me know. I really appreciated Gunstar Heroes' philosophy on difficulty. For starters, there are 3 difficulty options: easy, medium, and hard. The standard medium difficulty is challenging, but by no means unfair. Hard mode is an entirely different beast. I tried it and got absolutely bodied. There are also fairly generous checkpoints throughout each stage. It's not an instance where you die to a boss at the very end and then have to redo the entire level. This is incredibly refreshing because many games of this era ruthlessly punished mistakes and failure. It could be frustrating and demoralizing, so I'm happy this title holds back some punches here and there. Gunstar Heroes' level design supplements its strong gameplay diversity. The first phase of the game consists of 4 levels that you can tackle in any order you desire. I usually go from left to right because I'm a creature of habit, it seems. If you tackle the game in this order, then the first stage you run and gun through is a solid beginner's level. It's fairly standard fare for these kinds of games, but there is a cool bit where you scale up a pyramid and then slide down the other side. It serves its purpose, I totally get why it's here, but it is my least favorite of the 4 opening stages. The next level is set in some sort of mine or cave. You traverse the level on a minecart and you can switch between tracks on the floor and the ceiling at any point by pressing the jump button twice. The whole level is based on this very mechanic. You'll constantly be jumping from one track to the other to either retreat to a safer position or pour on the offense. This is my favorite of the bunch. In the third stage, you have to board the enemy's departing battleship as it lifts off from the ground. You have to do some basic platforming at the start while simultaneously dealing with standard and flying troopers. The fourth level is a mini-boss gauntlet disguised as a board game. You roll a die and most of the spaces involve some sort of battle. My most feared encounter is either the minion soldier or curry and rice. The former is this little guy who does a ton of damage, especially if he grabs hold of you and pile drives you. Though it is kinda hilarious to see his tiny pixelated body move across the screen. I fear the latter because you get stripped of your guns in this fight. I haven't figured out how to defeat them while avoiding taking significant damage myself. As you can probably see from my description of these stages, each and every one of them is distinct. They not only include different art styles and color palettes, but also unique gameplay mechanics and experiences. I think it's a very good sign that each level sticks out prominently in my mind. There are a few more stages you'll have to clear after the first 4, but I'll avoid spoiling them in case you have never played this game before and would like to try it out yourself. I'll just say that the diversity in level design continues all the way through to the end. Gunstar Heroes also shines in many of its boss fights. I thought they were the most fun part of the game, if not the most stressful. They throw a variety of patterns at you, testing your ability to recognize them as well as testing your reflexes. It is immensely satisfying once you nail a boss down to the point where you hardly break a sweat, dodging every attack and landing critical blows when the opportunity arises. Although a nitpick I have is that some bosses, particularly a few of the mini-bosses, can be comically easy to defeat. My favorite boss encounter, at least in the first 4 stages, is the one against Green. This is a 5-stage fight where he transforms into wildly different variations of himself. This red phase is a huge standout. You have to jump between the floor and ceiling tracks to avoid being hit by pillars and bombs. The game provides a warning by flashing these obstacles at you before they release. This engagement would be easy if you just had to focus on the track you're currently on, but the boss also has an energy orb that fires in a diagonal direction. Almost all the boss fights involve this kind of creativity. Gunstar Heroes is a game where nearly everything comes together. The core gameplay itself is solid. The ammo types and the ability to mix and match them in pairs provide a unique spin on the 2D action shooting genre. It also gives the game plenty of replay value because each of the weapon types have their own characteristics, strengths, and weaknesses. It encourages you to experiment and see what works best for your playstyle. The level design is varied, keeping things fresh. The boss fights are extremely well done and are perhaps the most fun part of the entire experience. I only have a few minor quibbles with Gunstar Heroes. The ammo types could use a bit more balancing because as it stands, I found Chaser to be a little too overpowered, especially when paired with Lightning. I also thought the visuals were nothing special outside of some neat pseudo 3D assets and admittedly strong character designs. These nitpicks aside, I can see why many consider this to be a top 5 title for the SEGA Genesis. For what it's worth, I agree. Thank you everyone for watching, and until next time, take care.